that when I'm on my deathbed and I'm reviewing my life and I'm there with my wife, let's say, I don't lean over to her and say, I wrote the mercy seat. That's not what it's about.
How are you?
I'm good, Tom.
You all right?
Yeah, hanging in there by a thread.
How's it all been going?
It's really good. We've done 4 shows in the States, and it's a similar show to that we were doing in Europe, but it's very different when we do it in the States, I guess. And we've done, we've done one in Boston, which was kind of finding our feet, I think, and now we're up and running, and they're great. So
how are you after the shows? They seem like a lot.
I'm good. I don't know. I don't get tired for some reason.
Good.
I have there's a sleep issue, which I think we all kind of suffer from. No one can sleep properly, so you're a bit brain dead in the day, but the shows are generally full of life.
I had a buddy tell me one time that the thing about getting used to, having a big crowd cheering for you is that you have a lot of adrenaline racing through your body and through your brain, and then you have to go right to bed.
Yeah. Well, we don't go right to bed, but there are things that you can do on stage that you simply cannot do off stage. There's a sort of a kind of confidence that at least I have about what I can do and what I can't do. You don't try this stuff at home kind of thing, which is certain interactions with people on stage, all of that sort of stuff, which there is I guess it's an adrenaline, or it's a kind of a sort of lifting of the heart when you're doing something that just makes all manner of things possible. So increasingly, there's a deep relationship with the audience, I think, or an ever-changing relationship with the audience, which has to do very much with a kind of outpouring and intaking of love in some kind of way that is unbelievably energizing.
I suppose that's why I was curious about how you feel after the shows.
So I'm not just saying this, but I just don't get tired.
Not even physically tired.
Yeah,
but it's a lot, all that love and all that stuff to take in.
Yeah,
a
lot of love.
To take all that in afterwards and be like, all right, well, I'm going to have a carrot from the carrot tray now,
Well, I don't know what that means.
You know what I mean?
I don't know what a carrot tree is.
Oh, no, the little tray in the back in the green room with the
carrot
carrots.
Tray.
Yeah.
Okay, carrot tray. I thought you have carrots growing on trees in Canada.
A Canadian thing. Yeah, I'm just trying to get you on it.
I think after I've done a couple of shows, I don't feel tired. I don't feel tired afterwards either for some reason. It's through the day you can get quite, when you're waiting around and stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the record, which I really love listening to. Let's start with the big tune.
He was a wild god searching what all wild gods are searching for, and he flew through the dying city like a prehistoric bird. He went searching for the girl.
That is Nick Cave and Wild God from the album of the same name. Who's he? Who's the Wild God?
It's a character, I guess, that finds its way through various songs on the record, which are kind of ever-changing, ever-morphing character that I think is old. It feels like an old man to me. That is, I think, searching for something to believe in, searching for someone to believe in him. It's a kind of exhausted, decrepit, used up God that's looking for looking for his people, or looking for someone that to believe in him. I think essentially in that song in particular, and he's sort of flying around through the different songs. So my songs tend to be written at the same time. I tend to sit down and on a particular day and begin writing the new record. I haven't written anything for 2 years, haven't thought about anything for 2 years. I put a date in the calendar and then I sit down and write the new record. And I write tend to write all the songs in a way at the same time to some degree, from scratch, and a lot of the ideas and the characters, they're often narrative songs, kind of bleed into each other, and so this wild God thing character
came first.
Yeah, that was an idea that was in my head to begin with. I think it's a kind of a searching force that's moving through the record.
How did he show up to you when you say you were sort of ruminating on that figure for a while?
The way I'd answer that is that the idea of a wild God starts with two words, right? That just sort of that have a kind of vibrational effect on me in some way, and that was the putting together of the word God, which on its own doesn't have that particular effect, with the word wild, and there was something that they may have been. The word God. I mean, I'm just constantly writing on a piece of paper, so I'm not trying to evade your answer. But
I don't think
it may have been like there might have been the word wild over on this page and the word God over in this page, and somehow I just kind of saw them together, and it was like, okay, these are two words that suddenly are generating a kind of imaginative energy, right? Where things are starting to feel exciting. There was something exciting about putting those two words together. There was something that felt religious, but at the same time pagan, and so there was something that was going on there that was exciting, and so I think then a song begins literally line by line. I don't have an overarching idea. I never sit down thinking, okay, I'm going to write a song about this today.
All right.
I don't think I've ever sat and opened up the newspaper and gone, oh my God, this is happening, and sat down and addressed a particular problem in the world.
Yeah.
These songs are just finding themselves. They're not concerned with the world as it presents itself in a way. They're concerned with matters of the heart and the soul and these sorts of things. So that's where my interest always is. And one of the criticisms, if I ever get criticisms, about my songwriting, is that I don't address, I have a public platform, but I do not address the problems of the day.
You get some shit for that?
I do get shit for that, yeah. And I just don't think it's my job to do so, and I don't think I have that kind of talent to do that. There are certain artists that can do that really well, although I don't particularly like their songs, to be honest.
Yeah.
So these matters are abstract. When I'm writing about these things, these are abstract questions that I'm writing about that warrant answers. You're wondering, like, well, where does that come from? And it's a legitimate question, because these are mysterious things. Because matters of the heart, matters of the soul, of belief, these sorts of things are mysterious things. So
I do understand what you mean, and I do understand. And I appreciate when you say that, I don't write songs about a thing. I don't write songs about a moment. And I appreciate you telling me that it's sort of line by line and it's not didactic. And you'd be right that I read it and I was thinking about Jesus, and I was reading it and I was thinking about humanity, versus transcendence. And I was reading it and I was thinking about getting old and losing power. But in some ways, sometimes I think that the power of poetry or art or songs that I've always loved is actually found in the tension between me trying to figure it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's exactly true. Beautifully put, actually, and it's.
Well, we can stop right here if you want. Yeah.
But it's that it's that thing. I mean, I don't know if my songs do this, but for me, it's that thing when I read a poem. It's not that when I stop and think, my God, what have I read? I understand something.
Yeah.
It's that suddenly I don't understand something. Something is just. There is just this tension.
Yeah.
I find that what I look for, really.
Did you know you wanted to be a storyteller before you knew you wanted to be a musician?
I was drawn to, I don't know about that, but I was drawn to stories. I've always been drawn to stories. You know, I mean, I've talked about this before, but when I was in the church choir, I mean, I was probably the only little choir boy who was, everyone else is just sitting there kind of giggling and picking their nose and whatever. I was actually interested in the stories that were being told in church. I was fascinated by those stories, and they did hold a certain kind of power to me. They were just intriguing to me. And so I think I've always had a way of seeing the world through narratives, through storytelling, through the kind of idea of the, symbolically and like parable-like view of the world and that sort of thing. That's how I see songs, and I think pretty much all of my songs are, in one way or another, a story. They're telling some story. They have characters, and they are telling a story.
I heard you talk to Stephen Colbert, and you said that music is one of the last opportunities we have for transcendence. What I'm trying to dig around for here is sort of the lightning strike moment. Maybe your first memory or your first moment, whether you realized it at the time or not, of like that music, both listening to it and experiencing it and performing it, can be transcendent.
When I look back on say, the birthday party concerts, which were extremely violent, extremely chaotic, anarchic affairs, violent affairs, that looked like the opposite of transcendence, you could say.
Yeah.
But actually they weren't. I think they were really an attempt to try and reach some higher order or higher level of things, but through a completely different way than I do it these days. And part of that was through a tension and chaos with the audience itself. This thing happens to this day, but it's done in a much more, positive way, I would say.
But like, maybe what I'll do is I'll share. So I remember when I've had transcendent experiences on stage as well, and I've had transcendent experiences making music as well. But I have this memory of being on Napster, and I'm so sorry that I used Napster. I have this memory of being on Napster when I was in like grade 8, and I downloaded the Stanley Brothers song "Rank Strangers." "Rank Strangers" to me, I think it's still my favorite song. And what I remember about that is not just how good it sounded, or how much the lyrics resonated with me. It felt above that. I felt like I saw a bliss that I had never experienced before, and I started to talk about God, and I started to think about life a little bit differently because of the way that song made me feel. So I guess what I'm looking for is that, like, that lightning bolt, whether it was like, I don't know, a Clash record or like, something that you heard that made you go like, oh, music can make me feel this way.
Yeah. Well, I don't know actually about what you're talking about. I think that was something that's sort of come upon me as I've grown into music. But I remember, let's say at 10 years old, sitting in watching TV as a little boy on the weekend in Australia, and for some reason, in Australia, back when I was a child, we didn't have Australian television. We only had imported TV, stuff from America. So we had all the American shows that would play in Australia. In fact, I thought American culture as a child was my own Australian culture. It's the only thing I ever had access to was American TV.
Yeah.
I still have a massive fondness for America because of that, and a nostalgia towards America that comes via the TV that I used to watch.
Yeah.
But anyway, they used to have a something called the Johnny Cash show.
Yeah.
And that I remember sitting there on the floor of sitting on the floor watching this black and white TV show, and seeing this guy Johnny Cash, and suddenly realizing that music was about something else. That music could be that music was a kind of dangerous thing. Yeah. There was an outlaw aspect to it. It was like evil. It could be evil, or it could be. It wasn't just something you sort of bounced along to, right? Yeah. And that had a massive effect. And I remember as a small child then thinking, I'd like to do that. I'd like to do that. But that wasn't that didn't sort of light a fuse in me that kind of I went all over the shop after that. But I do remember thinking that music had something to offer that was than more than I knew. You know?
Given that this is a Canadian show, let me play you this.
It's 4 in the morning, the end of December. I'm writing you now just to see if you're better. New York is cold, but I like where I'm living. There's music on Clinton Street. Oh,
That's Leonard Cohen and Famous Blue Raincoat. Beautiful, hey?
Not bad.
He's all right. He was okay.
Well, you know that. I mean,
Meaningful to you, I've read.
well, it's a similar thing. I grew up in Australia. I grew up in a small town in Australia that was full of bright, garish, permanently hot, bright, garish blue skies, and it was as far away from the Leonard Cohen temperament as you could possibly get. Right. It was, and that was what my childhood was like. And a friend, when I was about 14 or 15 or something, said, "Look, I've got this record. You've got to come and listen to it." And I went over to her house, and she put that on, and the first song was Avalanche, and that was a moment that I felt that I had someone articulating a particular feeling that I had about the world, a kind of a sort of sorrowfulness, a kind of sense of yearning, a sense of darkness about things that I could not find that there was just that was an unspoken thing within me that Leonard Cohen, that his voice articulated in an uncompromising and absolutely beautiful way. So he became a kind of touchstone for me. We actually did a version. The first song that the Bad Seeds ever did was a cover version of Avalanche, as some kind of weird, fucked up tribute to him.
Why was the birthday party so antagonistic towards its audience?
I just brought myself onto stage. I was just kind of like that.
Fighty.
Yeah, fighty, nasty, angry little guy. With nothing to be angry about. I had actually had a lovely childhood. I think the birthday party was just a sort of exaggerated extension of what my personality actually was.
How bad did it get with the antagonism to the audience? I just I'll tell you what I mean. I keep reading. The birthday party was incredibly antagonistic to their audience.
Well, the audience were also antagonistic.
Yeah. And then I read you say, that was I guess I don't. It's so different now that I don't even know what that looks like.
Yeah, well, we were advertised. I remember being advertised on a tour of Europe. The promoter put on the poster the most violent band in the world.
Oh, good.
Come and see the most violent band in the world.
Step right up.
So the people who came along because. We had this sort of ex-Marine friend of ours called Bingo who used to stand on side of stage and grab weapons and stuff off the people in the front row who'd come along to sort of teach us a thing or two. So it wasn't just us. We were, but it was a kind of blood and guts affair. These concerts, and they were exciting and incredibly. It was kind of anything goes and.
Scary?
I personally wasn't scared, but some of the other band members were terrified. They didn't know what was, they were sort of more conscious. I was barely conscious when I was going on stage, so that helped.
Yeah.
Had a kind of ameliorating, that helped.
The songs that, I'll skip ahead a little bit to the Bad Seeds, the songs then that, some of the early songs you became known for, they don't belie to me someone who's incredibly angry at the world. While they're dark, they do belie a compassion or an empathy. Let's just talk about the Mercy Seat. So one of the big songs that you've had, recorded by a lot of people other than you as well.
Johnny Cash.
Johnny Cash, pretty good, hey?
Yeah, that was good.
You got to hang out with him too, didn't you?
Yeah, I recorded a couple of songs with him actually.
Later in...
Yeah, at the end, towards his end.
He had gone very deeply back into, or not deeply back into, had gone very, found his way truly to God in that moment. Like he had been very, you know.
I didn't know that he'd.
Yeah, I know.
I didn't know that he ever wasn't.
That's why I stepped away from saying he went back to.
Yeah,
but I think he was much more.
I mean, he
open
did.
about
He
it there.
did. He did narrate the entire Bible, I think. Johnny Cash, right?
You ever hear?
You can actually go and have
Really?
Johnny Cash read the entire Bible too. I haven't had that done, but
In the Mercy Seat, did that feel like a conscious shift in the stories you told, the way you wanted to tell stories?
first of all, just to, I don't think I was angry at I wasn't angry at the world.
Okay.
Angry at the world feels like I was sort of kind of angry about the status quo, or angry about the sort of the workings of the world on a political level or something like that.
I see what you mean.
I just wasn't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say, I just wasn't.
But were you just angry is what I mean?
I was just held humanity in general in kind of contempt, I would say. You know, I'm not particularly proud of that, but that's basically the way I sort of saw things, and maybe that's a necessary thing for young people to feel. I hear it all the time these days, and I'm in constant arguments with young people all the time these days about various things. But anyway, I did the sort of foundation stone of my belief system now was that I initially saw the world at its worst, and so that there has been a kind of a transformation, I think, to be able to see ultimately that the world is a good place, that the world actually fundamentally tilts towards goodness rather than the other thing that I thought when I was young. Now, to talk about something like the Mercy Seat,
a song that is in my mind in listening to it, and I'm putting my own filter on it, is very understanding of someone who's about to die. I'm not afraid to die, you know, like, yeah, that feels like at least you're starting on the continuum towards the world is not a cold, dark place.
Yeah, well, I think for me that the guy who's going to die in the electric chair in the Mercy Seat did it. It's funny because when you know, he did what he was going to die for. That's essential. When Johnny Cash did it, you get the feeling like, in a typical Johnny Cash way, the guy was innocent and he's going to be put to death. Yeah. He's not innocent, this guy. And so he's just tussling with the various things that are going on throughout this song that sort of relate to that. But it is fundamentally a compassionate view of what we are as human beings, that we are conflicted, that we have potential for evil, that we have potential for good. If anyone out there thinks that they don't have potential for evil or for the absolute ultimate evils, then I think that they're probably deluding themselves.
Is the Jubilee Street then further along on the continuum of the cold storytelling to mean that the world is not a cold, dark place? Because, again, I am transforming, I am vibrating, I am glowing. Someone, again, who knows he did something wrong.
Yeah.
I don't mean to get you into a level 3 analysis of Nick Cave 3201.
Yeah, because people can do it much better than me. Actually.
Yeah, and I don't want to rob the joy of the music. I find whenever I read stuff like that, I'm removed from. I read it and I go, this has nothing to do with the reason I enjoy the music.
Just as far as Jubilee Street, the idea of Jubilee Street in its most basic is that it's going from the most abject to transcendence through the course of a song. Yeah. So it just builds into something where this guy is at the bottom of the barrel. The main character in this, he's a destroyed individual through his own sin, shall we say? Well, it doesn't use terms like that, but by the end of the song, he has transformed into a kind of godlike character. Yeah. So, The song is extraordinarily effective in that way as a way, as a kind of meta way of showing how you can do this. And it crawls along to begin with this sort of awful, tawdry, predatory sort of story of this man and his obsession with this girl and his eventual transcendent experience. So it's a great song.
How do you
it's a great song to play live. That song.
I was going to ask you, how do you feel when you play that? That's one of the big live ones.
Yeah, it's a sort of template for a bunch of Nick Cave songs, actually, not deliberately, but our songs do, incrementally build a lot of them to so that they're these monstrous. They start off small and end up like these monstrous things. But that's a beautiful song. Very happy about that.
They say that's the story of the resurrection. That the Christ's resurrection is one of the lessons you can learn from it. And this is not a religious show. I say this in interest, that the lesson, which I never got when I was growing up in the church, is that no matter what we do, no matter how the bad decisions we've ever made in our lives, transcendence and redemption is possible.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's Easter. Yeah, no, I do know that.
No, just given that the Pope's dead, I figure I better step in.
Yeah, well, you've done a very good job of explaining. I do understand that, and that is why I describe my songs as religious songs. They're not spiritual songs. They're religious in the sense that they are very much preoccupied, I think, with the Christ story in general. That idea of being in this world, in a world where God has completely withdrawn, and we are entirely alone, which is Christ in the garden before he is crucified. That moves incrementally into a transcendent experience where we are discovered in some way without using, modern American Christian terminology.
Enough,
but there is that is generally the trajectory of most of my songs, I'd say, or many of my songs.
I feel a bit torn here now. So I want to talk to you about grief, given what you went through with your young son, and I'll offer in the interest of some camaraderie, my own experiences. I'll just offer that I have my own experiences of grief and at a very young age.
Mm-hmm. Is that a parent?
Yeah, I was very young,
and
he died.
Your father died?
My father died. Yeah. And kind of my best buddy in my
when you were a teenager,
early 20s.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, me too. Actually.
Yeah, I know. I read that. I read that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of gave up on everything a little bit after that. I didn't look after myself, and I was.
I had a similar experience. People say that to me, but I think I was already on that. I have a slightly different view of that, but I mean, there was that absolute traumatic event that happened. I don't know how your father died.
Cancer.
Okay, well, for mine it was sudden. He died in a car accident. It was just like suddenly, that happened.
Yeah.
But, and then I definitely went off the rails, and I left and went to Europe, and my life completely changed. And I did have this energy that my band members often said, look, this is directly related to the fact that you changed, right? So I had a kind of a sort of feeling of violent feelings towards the world, but I also feel that there was a sort of premonitory, or that there was something going on before my father died that sort of led into that. It's very difficult to, maybe it's not the right place to even talk about it, but something that was going on that sort of led up to his death from me on a personal way, and that his death was kind of an accelerant to a certain kind of way of viewing the world. anyway, that certainly had a in the way that you're saying, a massively negative impact on the way that I saw the world for a while.
I mean, I was drinking and smoking dope a lot.
Yeah.
I went hit the bottle pretty hard there.
Yeah, I did the same.
Yeah, for a few years afterwards. You know, I'm not normally sheepish in talking about my father's death, but I do remember. I normally, I talk very openly about it because I remember what it was like to be in the club. I remember right before my father died, my friend Phil took me out for a beer and he said, "Listen, here's what my dad had died too.
Right.
Here's what's about to happen. Here's what you're about to go through." And it was incredibly helpful. So I like talking about it if it can help somebody else. But I do also remember seeing afterwards someone put up a post that their dog had died right after my father had died. And I had said like, "Oh, good. So I'm so sorry. Oh, geez. How awful. I wasn't the most compassionate person, but comparatively it was awful." The reason I'm sheepish is because, the loss of a young son is so unnatural and something was ripped from you. I promise I have a question. Did you stop making art after that? And when did you come back to it?
Well, first of all, just to say about that, it's interesting that you talk about a dog dying. I have a thing called the Red Hand Files.
Yeah, I've been reading them.
And people write in. I get hundreds of questions. It's turned into this massive thing. I get hundreds of questions a day, and which I read them all, and I look for one and that I feel I can answer and try and answer them in a basically human way. And but I get a lot of people writing unbelievably grief-ridden letters to me, and then you realize that they're talking about their cat,
of course,
or their dog,
of course,
and there is these are as painful as anything you can read. There's other things that happen. Just while we're on this, there's other beautiful things that happen too. Is that you're reading a letter of grief about someone, and you realize that this person's husband died 15 years ago, and this person is just still locked in this place, or still has the need to tell the story, to find someone to tell the story to. It's unbelievably moving. And the Red Hand Files had a huge effect on changing my view of the way the world actually is and the way the world operates.
Really?
That we are part. It's not just that you're in a club because you happen to lose someone very close to you. That we're all in the club. Yeah. All of us are in the club, or we will be in the club. But I think that we are all essentially creatures of loss. And that this is the sort of defining, for me, human characteristic, which is that we die, and that we know that we die, and that our lives are a kind of articulation of that idea, that we die, and that the ones that we love die. I mean, sometimes on stage, I don't want to get this is not a morbid thought even, but. There are moments on stage where I'm singing to the audience, and there is this incredible feeling that's going on. But part of that feeling is knowing that everybody in that audience will die.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've had thoughts where I've been in the food court at the mall, and I've looked around and said, everybody here is on team alive at the same time.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah,
we're the class of. Right now. Yeah. And there's a class after us.
We're extraordinary and sort of and it's a particular moment we have on on the other sides. The before and the after are an eternity, and and this obviously goes on to how we are prepared to spend the time, this short time that we actually do have, and perhaps part of that is the journey from kind of holding the world, of not valuing the world as perhaps we should when we're young, to understanding when we get older that this world is precious and that we are precious people in the world.
At what point can you even start to make songs again? At what point can you even...
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it was a very difficult time around then. The thing is that I just made a record. I just recorded a record. I hadn't finished the record, but I'd recorded the record in its very basic state, a record called Skeleton Tree. And it was a very dark record anyway. And then my son Arthur died, and I remember, Warren, who's in my band, came and sort of stayed with me through this time with us, and I remember saying to him days afterwards, "It goes on, we continue, right? We don't." This was a kind of desperate idea to have actually had that this doesn't stop anything, right? And we went back into the studio some short time after that to finish the record. This was like a major mistake to me, that I was in absolutely no condition to do anything. I was mad. I was completely mad with grief. And that record we couldn't make and we couldn't finish, and we just put it out in its raw state. But the thing that I know is that you don't know anything when something like that happens to you. You think you can even be articulate about things. You can even write and stuff like that, but you're literally a crazy person. And it took a long time for me to fundamentally connect to people. There was this sort of slow but sort of, it's really quite hard to describe, but a kind of like that I started to connect incrementally to the world in a way that I'd never experienced before. That this understanding of everyone that I saw, of the precarious nature, of their precarious nature, that this kind of understanding of the loss within us all. And this became a really kind of profound feeling towards everyone, and changed everything, changed my way I operated in my relationships with people that I loved and that were close to me, the kind of ordering of things, what was actually important in my life. Up until my son dying, I actually thought that what I did creatively was the most important thing in my life. Yeah. I had that idea that I go into my office, do not disturb, the master at work.
Famous for it. I remember before I knew about your music, I knew that about you.
This was the fundamental reason why I was put on this world, and that completely collapsed when my son died. That knowing that is not actually, that when I'm on my deathbed and I'm reviewing my life and I'm there with my wife, let's say, I don't lean over to her and say, I wrote the mercy seat. That's not what it's about. And that became really fundamental to things too. So the grief process, as slow and as sort of tortured as it originally was, had a massive effect on how I ended up seeing the world. Something that wasn't a decision, but was just a way of, it became a way of understanding the world.
So why do you still tour, and why do you still make music?
I still work. I still work as much. I still work as hard. I gave up my office.
You did?
Yeah, I gave up my office. I went back into my office and sat down and said, I can't do this anymore after my son died. So now I work around the house. I still work as hard, but I sit at the kitchen table and walk away. I'm just sort of a little more
interesting,
embedded within the thing. People are around me and all of that sort of stuff. I feel that the idea of touring now becomes more. It's more a form of duty, of something that I feel is sort of valuable on some level, as you were talking about before. That I think that there is a possibility through music to offer people a transcendent experience. I hope that experience isn't in and of itself enough, that people go on to to work out that they can approach the world in a kind of a refined and elevated way, where they're seeing the world as something of enormous potential and value. I hope these ideas sort of leak out in the world as something that I learned through the death of my child. That the death of my child has some, it's a terrifying thing to say, some value.
God love you for talking about it. Thank you. Let's maybe we'll get you off to your sound check by talking a little bit about that, the idea that like transcendence through music. I find that I love talking about that. But I'd also like to, I worry that as music becomes something experienced in the background or the experience as part of the day, they don't even have access to that. You want to talk about having transcendence music lead to something bigger? I worry that people won't even get the transcendence part because of lack of attention.
For me personally, I find it very hard to call myself a Christian. I have very, very similar feelings that you do too. I'm a rational person. I have, that there's a little atheist in me that keeps sticking his head up. But I have to say that particular part of me I find the least interesting, and that there is another part of me that's much more mysterious, that's talking about certain feelings and yearnings that I have towards certain things that is much more interesting, much less boring than the sort of atheistic side of me, and so that when I go to church, that it's that part of me that is ignited in some kind of that is ignited and is something that is enormously important as to how I go about making music. So it's not just that music over here is where I get a transcendent experience, is what I'm trying to say.
I understand.
It's part of the kind of fabric of my life. But it is the way to reach people. It is the way to reach people in what you were talking about before, in essentially a secular society where we've lost the normal rituals that go around that are just step-by-step programs for a transcendent experience, like going to church and all of that sort of stuff. We still have music, and so music is extraordinarily important for me for that reason, that we have that, and that people can actually go along to a concert and be taken out of themselves and lifted out of the sort of worries and burdens that they have into something greater,
I tell you, I'd talk to you all day, but then you'd never get to your show. Thank you for coming in.
All right, my pleasure.
Thanks for the chat.
Pleasure.
Hey.
Okay.